about digging up the past, digging up the old man that was buried at baptism, and doing what we used to do. We need to stop that. We need to not do that. Now, we have an example of this in Acts chapter 5 of Ananias and Sapphira. Now, most of us are familiar with this, but let's go over there in Acts chapter 5. We're going to kind of read through this and make a few observations. Who'd like to read Acts chapter 5, 1, 2, and 3 for us? Go ahead, Matt.
But a man named Ananias sold a piece of property, took back some of the price for himself, with his wife's gold. Bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why does Satan fill your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back some of the price away?
Okay, was it wrong for Ananias to keep back some of the price of the land?
No.
No? What was the problem here? Okay. All right. People do that today? Absolutely. This is not what you'd call total disclosure, okay? Partial disclosure, maybe. Okay, now the next verse tells us, while it remains that it was not thine own, and after it was sold, was it not in thine own power? Hast thou conceived this thing in thy heart? Thou hast not lied to men, but to whom? God. Anybody think they can get away with lying to God? No? Okay. But sometimes people think they can, don't they? All right. The next verse tells us that Ananias, hearing these words, he fell down and gave up the ghost. And great fear came upon all that heard these things, and the young men arose and wound him and carried him out and buried him. Just like that. One fell swoop. Okay, so in about the space of 3 hours, when his wife, not knowing what was done or what had happened to her husband, came in and Peter answered her, tell me whether ye sold the land for so much. And she said, yea, for so much. So we have conspiracy between Ananias and Sapphira, and this was a lie. So she turns around and tells him the same story that Ananias had told him roughly 3 hours before. This is conspiracy to tempt the Holy Spirit. Kind of a strange way of saying it, but that's what it is. Then Peter said unto her, how is it that ye have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which have buried thy husband are at the door, and they shall carry thee out. Talk about a sobering thing here, sobering statement. This would get you shaking in your boots. Because I don't think Sapphira had boots on, but that's beside the point. All right, now the next passage tells us that she fell down straightway at his feet and yielded up the ghost, and the young men came in and found her and dead, and carried her forth and buried her by her husband. A matter of an afternoon, 3 hours, or morning. Depends on what time of day this was. And what does the next verse tell us in this text?
Great fear seized the whole.
Great fear. Not little fear, not small fear, but great fear. They saw this happen. And what do you think it would have made the brethren think and do? Yeah. Knock it off, yeah. They wouldn't be doing this. Go ahead.
That's played out because husband Ananias had fell down dead. It could have been a fluke. The fact that Sapphira came in, hubris, I guess, that the fact that she fell down dead a second time, confirmation this wasn't a fluke. It was the action of God.
Beth, then Mo.
I was going to say, notice the opportunity given to each of them. The opportunity to know.
That's right. Had the opportunity to tell the truth.
Straightforward, yeah, we kept back the amount we wanted.
Yep. Mo, do you have something you want to say? That would have been the result of this, yes. Dying in a lie. Go ahead, Mac.
how much time they with this person who had just picture myself as down.
Then you go back out and go to dig another hole for his wife. Yeah. And great fear fell upon all the church and upon as many as heard these things. It shows us the importance of this. And the question is, these verses that we just looked at, are they a precedent? You know, because sometimes people don't think there's a precedence in the Bible. There's really nothing in there, they think. Do these verses set forth lying as being wrong without exception? There are some people who believe that lying is morally right in certain situations. They do. No. You read some of these people, like Fletcher and some other ones, who are into situation ethics, and they'll tell you that. And the Catholics, they actually have this thing called mental reservation. Yeah, it's a doctrine they have, okay? The doctrine of mental reservation refers to using unclear language to conceal the truth in certain situations. Okay? Which means what? You're lying, you're deceiving somebody. Okay, and I want to bring something out here. Not all deception is lying. Okay? In the military, you run an ambush. Is that a deception? Okay, is it lying? Well, sort of, yes. Okay?
I was going to say further, too.
Yeah.
When we were studying Proverbs, also discovered one of the questions I want to ask, is it okay to? The only thing I can say is that military, I know right now, not sure.
Sure. No, you can't do that. You've been debriefed on it, like some of us had to be. Yep. Yep.
There are some situations
Yep.
where too much and if you blur out too much proper there,
Mona?
of it there. Parents that, if their wife that's passed away, have to know patients, but
Yeah.
it makes them more agitated, violent, so,
Yeah.
you know, I would say, you know, or looking for their, very agitated, looking for the garage getting fixed. Kind of lying to them.
Go ahead, Seth.
I say that military, that's the only thing I know. I did it for 22 years, but one of the things that I've learned to do, goes with what Mona was saying, that old information, change it to preserve somebody from harm to other people. And the way I look at it is, that's exactly what Abraham did when he went to the city. Well, he said that his wife was his sister.
Told that to Abimelech, yeah.
His wife felt that he was going to, they were going to
Yeah.
lie.
Well, there were consequences that came upon Abimelech, too. Yep. That's right. He did. They turned around and said to Abram, why'd you do this? Go ahead.
I'll get a little more. My mother remembered
Hmm.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
And this was the last year with me. Didn't have Alzheimer's. It was the last this year. And I talked to her. Given. She had been immersed in lady and given out of the grave of baptism.
Yep.
So anyway, I was trying to provide her some comfort,
Yep.
but it was
That's
a
all- that's all you
shocker
can
to hear
sometimes.
that kind of
Provide
thing.
people comfort, yeah. The reason the Catholics claim that this is okay to do is because they believe in certain situations, such as saving human life and protecting one's family, it's okay to do this. I want to bring up something else here. Now, over in, well, actually, some have asserted that the midwives over in Exodus chapter 1, they were blessed by God because they had lied. Okay, now this is kind of something that some of them throw out there to try to prove that situation ethics, lying at certain times is okay, but when we examine this, we'll see that that's not really the case. You know, Norman Geisler, he said that even if you left your lights on to deter criminals, that was a lie. But, you know, so you have to be careful how far you go with this. The Bible indicates that, well, they're saying is, Norman Geisler said, the Bible indicates that there were occasions where intentional falsifying, lying is justifiable. And he tried to bring out these two situations with the midwives and Rahab. So let's go to these situations, and we're going to kind of look at them and see whether Mr. Geisler had any real validity in this. Let's go over to Exodus chapter 1. We're going to begin at verse 15. Now, who'd like to read verse 15 of Exodus chapter 1? Go ahead, Brother Coombs.
King of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphiah, and the name was the other.
Okay. And then what happened in verse 16? What did the king do there when he talked to them? Okay, so what we're talking here is there's a difference between what is legal and what is moral. Okay? Now, you can't interblend the two. Sometimes they may be interblended, but kings, presidents, congresses generally don't pass laws that are moral. They pass stuff that's legal. And when you go to court, the only thing they care about is what is legal, not what's moral, not what's ethical, even though they may say this. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the birthing stools or the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. This was the law. Okay? They were trying to do some social engineering here through geneticide. Infanticide, I guess, would be the right way to say that. By killing off the male infants, they were trying to control the population. Now, they did the very same thing in China. They got some real problems over there. And there's a considerable amount of human trafficking that goes into China because of the lack of wives for these young Chinese men. Because the party had said in China that if you had more than one child, you're going to be punished for it. And so they would abort the female babies in China, keep the males. That way they had an heir for their property. And the problem was there were not enough females for them to be able to continue on their race. So they have been involved in human trafficking in neighboring nations and places like Africa and things like this. Real problem in the world. The next verse tells us here, we get into this discussion of what's moral and legal. The midwives did what? Even though the king had made this decree, what did they do in verse 17? Tell them. They defied the king. They did not as the king commanded, but they saved the men, children alive. Okay? So we know this. We know that they were actively participating in this thing, circumventing what the king said and doing what they thought because they feared God. Go ahead.
Is that because they feared God?
That's right. That was their motive. Their intention was to defy the king because they feared God. Feared a higher power. Okay? Go ahead.
I think this is like with Abraham saying that Sarah was his wife and with the wife's faith. I think this is a clear example that the Bible doesn't shy away from the fact that people try to do their best, but often the execution of and there was no need to situation if they tried. But in the moment we often will I have to explain my actions. They saved the in defiance of the God. But then I can imagine trying to think, what am I going to say about this?
During the Nuremberg trials, anybody know what law they appealed to? During the Nuremberg trials, does anybody know what law they appealed to prosecute the Nazis? Couldn't appeal to our law because they were not under our law. They couldn't appeal to the German law because that was the law they said they were obeying. So they appealed to a higher law, the law of common decency, the law of the proper treatment of people. And that's what they appealed to when they took them to trial. And they hung a lot of them for war crimes and things that they had done in prison camps and so on. Now, in verse 18, we have the king questioning the midwives. And the king of Egypt called the midwives, and he said unto them, why have you done this thing and saved these men, children alive? Why have you defied my law and done this? So he knew what they were doing. And what did they give him for rebuttal in verse 19? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, what?
Not like your woman, they give.
Okay, is this true? Would the Egyptian women have babies, Hebrew women have babies faster than Egyptian women? Because what they're trying to imply here is, well, by the time we got there, Pharaoh, the babies were already born. Women in Colorado have babies faster than they do in New Hampshire? Nope. Okay. This is not necessarily a biological fact. What they're saying is, well, they were quick and easy to deliver. And I know some women who have babies quick, and I've known some that don't. It takes them a long time. What's that? Yep. Had a son that was premature. You wouldn't know it now, but he was. Verse 19, was verse 19 a lie? Why?
Yeah,
They
because
were
it
there
was
to
God
deliver.
did something that wasn't the truth.
Okay. Now, whether their excuse is a biological fact or a lie, the text doesn't really actually say. We kind of go back and we look at this, and we know from verse 17 they deliberated and they choose to defy the Pharaoh, and it would seem that they have lied when they were questioned. That's what you can deduce from this. You can look a little further on and see it too. Okay. Now we know over here in verses 20 and 21 when we read them, therefore God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty, and it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. So God blessed the midwives. Why did he bless them? That's the question. Okay. Now see, these people like Geist, when some of them say, or Fletcher, that he blessed them because they lied. That's something you have to look out for when people try to make accusations or they try to make assumptions about the scripture. Then, of course, we have a further degree in verse 22. Pharaoh charged all of his people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter shall save alive. So That's when we get to later on in chapter 2 with Moses. Go ahead. Yeah. Yep. And this is what they did later on. Cast them in the river. Go ahead, Seth.
Well, that last verse, I mean, you have to understand that God didn't reward them for the lie. God rewarded and blessed them for them fearing God. It has nothing to do with that they lied and God, because God doesn't like lying.
No, he
Because
doesn't.
they feared God, they were blessed.
Exactly true. Yeah, he blessed them, as we said, because they feared him. Okay? We'll see this in the next one. Okay, turn over to Joshua chapter 2. This is another one they use to try to prove that, situation ethics, is lying is okay in certain circumstances. They go to about Rahab, the harlot, and they try to use that as a proof text or an example to say that lying is okay in certain situations. Okay, Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. And Joshua the son of Nun, he sent out Shittim 2 men to spy out secretly, saying, "Go and view the land, even Jericho." And they went and came into the harlot's house named Rahab, and they lodged there. And then what happened? Well, and then somebody was a witness, or there were witnesses, and it was told the king of Jericho, behold, saying, there came men from hither the night of the children of Israel to search out the country. Hey, king, did you know that there were spies at Rahab's house? I don't know how the conversation went down, but it would have been something like that, that he was informed that there were some people at Rahab's house that were spying out the land. You see, the interesting thing here is as you read later on in this, you find out a whole host of information that they knew about the Israelites, and they knew about the God of the Israelites. That's an important aspect. You have to keep reading in the text. If you shortchange the text, you're not going to find that out. Okay, so in the next verse, what happened? Well, Rahab is interrogated or questioned by the king's men. Who'd like to read verse 3 of Joshua 2? Seth?
And the king of Jericho unto Rahab, saying, bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country.
Okay, so the king's men come to her house and they ask her these questions. Hey, bring these guys out that have come in here to search out our country, these spies. So, what does Rahab do? Verse 4. Yep. And the woman took the 2 men and hid them and said thus, well, they came to me, but I don't know where they went.
You can catch them.
Yeah, she said specifically they went to the gate.
And she says, go quickly in verse 5. And it came to pass at the time of the shutting up of the gate when it was dark that the men went out. Whither and the men went, I want not. Pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. So you can see it's not just one lie that she gives out here, multiple lies, okay? All right? Then verse 6 tells us, and she brought them up on the roof of the house and hid them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. So she hides them. And she tells them this story. I don't know where they're from. I don't know where they went. Anybody have a question? Okay. Peripheral vision must be playing tricks on me today. All right. So then what happened in verse 7? Well, they believed her. If they didn't believe her, they wouldn't have left the city and gone after them. Okay, because it tells us, and the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords, and as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate. Okay. So the men leave, they believe her, they take off, they go after in the direction where they think the spies have gone because she misled them. And then we read in verses 8 and 9, and before they were laid down, she came to them upon the roof, and she said unto them, this is an important fact, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint because of you. Okay? What is this? We talk about statements of faith. Yes, that's what this is. This is her faith. She's describing the faith that she has. She knows that God is behind all this. Now, I don't know what she knew about God, but she knew that he was behind him, and she knew that he had caused the Egyptians to fall some short time before this. Seth, did you have a comment you want to bring up?
You already mentioned
Okay.
it. I was just about to say, shows that it doesn't matter what we do, we can say what we want to say, God's will. So God was going to preserve this. It didn't matter what rate.
It's kind of like what Mordecai said to Esther, whether you do it or not, God's going to accomplish it somehow. And go ahead.
Also the concept of
Mm-hmm.
is an immature faith,
Yeah.
had not grown up in the Jewish everything about God's law, Moses, and all that. So to have a sinful situation come up because somebody doesn't know how to handle things in an improved way, like that, God is trying to obey, but they mess up. Grace applies. It's not the person who doesn't care. The person who doesn't care doesn't get the grace, but the one who's trying their best, God can actually still use that mess up, that mistake.
Wasn't unaware of something she would.
Let's look at verse 10. And it's a further essence of her faith. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you. And when you came out of Egypt, and he did unto you the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. Then she goes on to say, and as soon as we had heard these things, our heart did melt. Makes your heart sink, it melts. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you, for the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and earth beneath. He is the God of all. That's what she's saying here. So then she asks this. She makes a request. So what is her request in verse 12? Yeah.
She makes sure their God, not her God, that it's going to happen.
Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you may also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. Okay? She wants them to promise her. What does she want them to promise her?
No harm will come to her family.
Yeah, that they'll be spared. And it didn't. As you read on down through this, you'll see that it doesn't happen. Okay? There's a lot more to this. There's a whole other section in chapter 2 about this. Talks a lot more about her. Now, what I want to do now is I want to mention to you that she lied 3 times, okay? She said, I did not know where they were from, in verse 2. Then she said, when it was dark, they went out. And then she said, where the men went, I do not know, but if you follow after them, you'll find it. So here's what's interesting. When you go over to the book of Hebrews, if you turn over there, kind of what we had our vacation Bible school on last month. This is, some people call this the Faith Hall of Fame. I think it was probably one of the first chapters I memorized in the Bible many years ago. verse 31 says, by faith Rahab, the harlot or the prostitute, as the ESV says, did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. The King James says, when she had received the spies with peace. Okay? It had nothing to do with her lying. And some people think, well, that just proves that it's okay to do that, but that's not what's being discussed here. It's her faith. Why did she do this would be the question.
God's people.
She believed in God. She believed in his power. And she knew that these people who would come here were God's people exactly. And this was all done in accord with faith. And as we've already brought up, yes, people can make mistakes. But in the end, it's their faith that's what will endure. God is not sanctioning people lying here or running falsehoods or doing devious things. Go ahead.
Rahab was willing to become a proselyte. That demonstrated that she had a willingness to learn and to adapt and submit to God's law.
Yep.
And she continued moving forward.
And she did, because who did she marry?
Obed, right?
Yes. Who was what?
He was a descendant of Jesus.
He was the father of Boaz,
Yeah.
who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. He shows up in the lineage of Jesus. You know, sometimes we get all caught up in the men that are in the lineage of Jesus, but God was very specific about how the fact that Isaac had to come through Sarah, couldn't come through Hagar. It was very important. Then you see Jesus coming through Rahab the harlot and through Ruth later on when she married Boaz, who was a descendant of Rahab and her husband. James also talks about this. He said, likewise, also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? But, you know, for someone, go ahead. Somebody have something you want to say? There is another meaning of that, you know. Some people tried to water that down and say that it was an innkeeper, but, you know, I don't know. I know a Methodist minister tried to tell me that once. You know, they've had a Methodist minister try to tell me other stuff too, but, you know. Although I should say this, I got some of my best advice ever from a Methodist minister, and I was telling some of you the other night when I was about 17. I asked him, I said, how does a fellow know what church he should belong to? And he put his hand on my shoulder like they do in a typical pious way and said, it's the one that follows the Bible. So that was my quest. He was right about that, but, you know, but I don't think he was quite right in saying that Rahab the harlot was an innkeeper. I mean, you know. Yeah, you got to be consistent with it, exactly. And when the Good Samaritan put the person up, did he take her to a harlot's house? Yes, okay. I don't think so. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things I want to also bring up, we got a couple of minutes here. I want to go over to Hebrews and show you why this whole concept of lying is so important. Why it's not something we need to be involved in. Over in Hebrews chapter 6, the scriptures tell us this. It says in verse 16, for people swear by something greater than themselves in their disputes and oaths of confirmation. Now remember, the Jews used to swear by the temple because they believed there was nothing higher to swear. And if you made that kind of an oath, it was, you know, and that's what Jesus was talking about, not to make those kind of oaths. All right? But he goes on to say that when God decided to show more conveniently to the heirs the promise of the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed with an oath. What does verse 18 tell us? There are two things that we can know. They can't be changed. What are they? Okay, what's the other one? You have to look back at about verse 14. God keeps his promises. Okay, when God makes a promise, he makes a promise. Okay? We make promises sometimes we're not able to keep them. Now, nothing against my father, but he was always promising something, but he couldn't do. And after a while, I never asked him for anything, and he asked me one day why, and I said, well, because you say all this stuff, and it doesn't happen. So I'm just going to leave that alone, you know. And back in verse 13, actually, it says, for when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no greater one whom to swear by, God swore by himself. Think about this. God swearing by himself when he made this promise to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, saying, surely I will bless and multiply you, and Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. Did Abraham ever really get to see the fruition of that promise? Not really. I mean, he saw it in Isaac, but he never saw what that nation had become, how God had multiplied it and made it great. Then we get to verse 16 where it says that some people swear by something greater than themselves, but the point here is that when God swears by himself in a promise, there's nothing greater than that. You can swear by the temple, you can swear by the doorknob of the temple, or, you know, some other thing, but when God makes a promise, he swears by himself, there's none greater. Nothing greater than that. That's the end of it. Stop, that's it, no more. No more can be said about it. So the two immutable facts or unchangeable facts are these. God does not lie. When he makes a promise, he keeps it. Okay? So this shows us what? That this is a characteristic of God that is absolute. Okay? God is absolute. Exactly. Okay? That's exactly true. He's the essence of truth. You could call God a lot of things, but to say that one characteristic is greater than any other, well, that wouldn't be reasonable, because they're all the same. You know, some have done that. Like Calvin believed that the sovereignty of God was higher than all the other characteristics of God, which was really a mistake when you read that. There was a misconception on his part. Now we have another passage over in Titus. It also tells us here over in Titus what? What does it tell us about God in Titus? That God cannot what? God cannot lie. It's reiterated again in Titus. It's not part of his personality. He can't do it. If somebody said, what is God incapable of? He's incapable of lying. Okay? And he's incapable of saving somebody who doesn't want to be saved, too. Because of man's free will. All right, I guess we're past the time here. I forgot to ring the bell, so we'll ring the bell and